And the first thing we're going to do, I guess, Marcel, since you're in the spotlight, is show Marcel's process of what to think about. What are some check boxes to make sure that your agency is ready and able, and how to get started raising your prices? Go ahead, Marcel.
All right. Yeah. So obviously, if you have the ability to raise your prices right away, definitely go ahead and do that. But the important thing to remember about pricing in a service company is that revenue is not profit. So if you can double the amount of money that somebody pays you for a website, but it takes you twice as much time, have you really made that much forward progress? The answer is no, not really. We want to make sure that our price increase is also relative to our cost basis. So the way I typically think about this is I consider this the four levels of operations that you might be operating at in your agency. And we think about this in terms of how data-driven are you and how process-oriented are you. So what I encourage you to do before the end of the new year is to really take a step back and think about, where do we sit on this quadrant? Do we have a lot of process, but maybe we don't have a lot of data, right? So in this case, you're probably going to be struggling with some cash flow, or maybe you just don't really have a lot of visibility into what you need to do next, like where the opportunities really lie. Maybe you do have a lot of data, you're tracking a lot, like your time really well, you've got some nice systems in place for your CRM and et cetera, but you're not really highly process oriented. So in that case, you're probably seeing a lot of cash flow ups and downs because you're not really sure what it takes to get things done. And maybe that's not really consistent, or maybe you don't have either of those things and it's probably just really hard for you. So the next thing that I want to kind of ask you to think about is, how do we start to move you up and to the right? And usually the path I recommend, if you find yourself down in this corner, is to get some basics in place, get some time tracking software in place, but really keep that as simple as possible and focus on first trying to define your process. Try to define, like, what do I think our process looks like, even if it's at a very high level, so that now you have something to actually track your data against, and then start tracking on projects. How much time is it actually taking us to do this thing? How much cost is it actually taking us to do this thing? So that when you go to increase your prices and either your product stays the same or your product has to scale a little bit, you have to add some value to that product to justify their higher price point, you have some clarity around how that is going to stack up against your cost basis. And you'll get an understanding of if that can scale, if it's going to be profitable, and if it's going to get you enough cash flow. So that's how I would recommend you start with this, is identify where you are in the quadrant. If you're data-driven but not process-oriented, map your process. If you're process-oriented but not data-driven, start to get some systems in place to track your time and track your costs on projects. And that will start to move you into this magic zone here of being both data-driven and process-oriented. And you will have a crystal ball in your agency that'll help make all these pricing conversations way easier to have.
I got a question.
What's up, Alex?
Marcel, what do you see typically the key things that agencies are not factoring in? And Ryan, this is definitely a question to you too, but what are the things agencies are not factoring in that tend to take what they assume is a 30-40% margin and actually make that a 20-10% margin?
Right. So there's a couple of things I'll talk about here. First is for the agencies that use a lot of contractors, they're not counting the time that they spend internally managing the project. You got to factor that time in. Even if you're paying a lot of outsourced contractors to do the work, if you as the founder, or if you have somebody on your team that has to run around and spend 20 hours a week managing those projects, that's costing you money. You couldn't pull that person out and still have the outcomes that you want for those clients. So you got to make sure you're still measuring your internal time and measuring the cost of that and factoring that into your gross margin. The other thing that I will say is, don't plan your projects to a net margin target. I really don't like the idea of trying to take overhead and then bake that into the way that you estimate projects. I don't really see the use of that. I think those two things are best to be kept separate. So I would look at, just how efficient are you at earning revenue on a project per project basis? And I would look at that independently from your overhead and your net margin as a business, and target for 50 to 70% gross margins on your projects. That's a bit of a side tangent, but I want to make sure I call that out. The last thing that I'll say is, depending on what your policy internally is for timesheets, you might be in a position where you're incentivizing your employees to not input all of the time that it takes to do work for your clients. So if your timesheets are always exactly 40 hours a week, that's suspicious. Look into that, because there's a good chance that Johnny spent an extra 4 hours on Saturday morning working on that project, but he didn't put it in the timesheet. So you think it takes 20 hours to get that logo done. It actually takes 26. That's a really important distinction that you want to become aware of. So I would say, like, making sure that you're factoring in the possibility that the way that you've set up expectations and incentives around timesheets are not encouraging transparency, which is the most important factor on timesheets. And it comes back to how you use that data.
Oh, I have a follow-up question there, and then we'll back into Ryan's. But Ryan, give me your answer to the same question. What are the main things that you see that are driving costs up unknowingly to those agencies?
Yeah. So two things. The one is not, so you have all your employees and even your contractors, tracking their time. So you're trying to get a good idea of what the cost is there, but you're not tracking your own time. Often agency owners, especially if it looks like, you can't get things done in time or you're going over budget, then you just end up working, at night or on weekends. And then because you're not tracking all your time, you forget to add that and factor that in next time. And that ties into Marcel's point about managing contractors. You say, oh, I'm going to outsource this whole thing to the contractor, but then you forget that, you've got to fix things and you've got to communicate with them. And, that ends up, taking 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours. And then all of a sudden, like, you've blown your budget and you didn't even know about it. The second point is on those outsource items and on those contractors, I find a lot of companies aren't marking those up sufficiently. And so, they'll quote out a whole project and they'll outsource some parts, and then their remaining margin is just on the internal hours that they're trying to finish to get the job done. So it's like, 50,000, okay, I got to pay this person 15 and this person 10 to do the website and some video stuff. And now I've kind of squeezed my margin into the rest of the time that I'm spent managing that project or doing strategic type work. And really, you need to be marking up those things ahead of time and factoring that into the overall price before you jump into it.
Got it. I got one that's not a big one, but maybe it'll have some light bulbs go off. But we did a project recently where we had to add contractors to both the back end of the site, Airtable, and a couple other accounts. And I don't think about this because it's $5 here, it's $10 there. But I got my bills from, or, those automatic charges from the platforms that I had to add the contractors to. And it ended up being about $300 in additional software costs, which, at that point, I've got to look at that and say, how can I do this a little bit differently, or just budget for it, right? But hard costs, are there any real hard costs outside of time? Are there any real other hard costs that you see come up in some of these just project or retainers that they didn't anticipate?
Anybody? Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a consideration. You want to make sure that you're factoring in the cost of production materials. In this case, is what I would consider that. So you're factoring your materials. Often you want to mark those materials up. And if it's something that you have to pay for, that you would consider overhead, usually, like, let's say, for example, you've got the Adobe suite for all of your creatives internally. So you're just going to pay for that monthly, whether you have clients or not. You still want to make sure that you're looking at that relative to the total cost basis of your production team. So when you look at their salaries, you also want to look at what are all the software, and equipment and tools that we have to pay for to make sure that those team members are productive, and use that to assess whether or not you're being efficient at earning your revenue in your business. So that's another big one. And the last one that I'll mention is actually a little bit more nebulous, but it's not paying attention and not documenting scope changes very well. And this is dangerous because obviously it's going to affect your gross margin. And if you're tracking your time, you'll pick up that, yeah, we spent more time on this than we thought we were supposed to. But if you're not actually documenting that it's because the client asked for something that was out of scope, then you might not actually have a clear picture as to why that is. So be clear about scope changes, even if you're not charging the client for it. And this is a strategy that Jason Swank actually teaches that I really like. It's the $0 change order. So you're making it clear to the client, we're doing you a favor. And then internally, you've got a process to make sure that you're capturing, like, hey, this is something that is outside of what we originally planned for. And it gives you an opportunity to adjust the expectations to reflect that, so that when you're looking at the data afterwards, it's not just this outlier with no context. You've actually got clarity as to why that thing took longer.
Oh, I love that too. You have more capacity to do that if you understand your cost structure ahead of time. 100%. So if if you know, hey, you're really squeezed on this project and you only have a 10% profit margin on it, or 40% gross margin, then you don't have the capability to do those $0 scope changes. But if you know you've got a much bigger cushion built in, then that informs your conversations with the client, and how much you are able and willing to give on those sorts of things.
I love it. That's a perfect segue into the spreadsheet